promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon and many thanks for tuning into West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. The Open Society Foundation, OSF, calls for regional stability at the ongoing 75th session of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights.
In relation to Senegal, if it is not checked and if it is taken to be only a trickle, it could end up being a major problem, and we are hoping that timely, decisive engagement is going to continue.
Liberia's electoral umpire and political parties signed MOU to promote a 30% female quota listed in the October 10th elections. The World Health Organization, WHO, says MPOs no longer represent public health emergency of concern.
However, as with COVID-19, it remains important for countries to maintain their testing capacities and to continue their efforts, assess their risk, quantify their needs to respond, and act promptly when needed.
And the World Bank says Africa has all the resources it needs to not only get rich but stay prosperous. Stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is James Adjapong with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining us. The Open Society Foundation and African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies have expressed concerns about regional stability, with particular emphasis on Senegal and Sudan. This was made during the side event of the 75th session of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights in Banjul, the Gambia. Meanwhile, a Senegalese CSO, African Jom, is calling for the unconditional release of all political prisoners in the country. Our Banjul correspondent, Sankole Janko, has more in this report.
The side event took place after a human rights report on Senegal was presented at the 75th session of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights in the Gambian capital, Banjul. The Director of Policy and Engagement of Open Society Foundation, George Kegoro, expressed concerns about the stability in Sudan and, in particular, the political situation in Senegal.
In relation to Senegal, we reiterate the concerns that the Commission raised and what is going on in Senegal. If it is not checked and if it is taken to be only a trickle, it could end up being a major problem, and we are hoping that timely, decisive engagement is going to continue to ensure that Senegal sticks to the expectations of its population in terms of democratic practice and the looming transition in that country.
Also speaking on the escalating violence in Sudan is the Executive Director of the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies, Mrs. Hannah Foster.
We all need to have our hands together, our actions together to make sure that unconstitutional coups do not take place anymore anywhere in Africa. We need to say no to violence.
For his part, the chairman of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Remy Ngoy-Lumbo, says the AU is working assiduously to address the conflict in Sudan. About the tense political climate in Senegal, the chairperson urged all parties involved to embrace dialogue and emulate good human rights models in the continent. Meanwhile, a report presented by a Senegalese civil society organization, Africa Jom Center, says Senegal's democratic model is declining, while human rights and fundamental freedoms are increasingly under threat. According to the CSO, the state arrested several people during the events of February and March 2021 for expressing their opinion and killing civilians during protests. The Africa Jom additionally denounced the authorities' attack on freedom of demonstration, suppressing press freedom, and a host of others. The center therefore called on the unconditional release of all political prisoners and prisoners of conscience to diffuse an overly toxic and tense political climate. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankole Janko reporting from Banjul.
The Guinean government has remarked on the legal status of the three leaders of the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution, FNDC, who were released on Wednesday after 9 months in detention. The leaders, namely Omar Silla, alias Fonike Mangwe, Ibrahima Jallo, and Mamadou Biloba, were held without trial. But the government spokesman said on Thursday that the legal proceedings against them have not been dropped. Usman Gwal Jallo disclosed that they will from next week face justice.
Ceci ne met pas fin à la poursuite judiciaire.
This does not put an end to the legal proceedings. It is just put at the disposal of the religious leaders to respond to the grievance of its elders that we have invited to intercede with the authorities so that they may recover their freedom while awaiting the opening of their trial, which should take place next week. This is not a release as many hear it. It is a provisional release. It is a grievance that is being questioned. So this does not put an end to the judicial pursuit. The legal process will continue and decide the fate of our fellow citizens who are being pursued by the court.
Concitoyens qui sont poursuivis devant les juridictions.
Usman Gawar Jallo, a spokesperson for the Guinean government. Let's take you to Liberia, where the build-up to the October 10th presidential and legislative elections is by the day enjoying stakeholders' attention. This time, the National Election Commission, NEC, and political parties have signed a memorandum of understanding to promote a minimum 30% gender quota for female listing. The MOU will serve as a driving force in reducing the gap between male and female aspirants in the approaching elections. Our Morovia correspondent Darlington Pogba reports.
Speaking during the signing ceremony, Chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Deviata Branlasana, said the MOU marks a significant milestone in efforts towards an inclusive political environment. She described it as a holistic display of firm commitment on the part of political parties towards the inclusion of women in the country's political landscape.
This memorandum of understanding for the implementation of a minimum of 30% gender quota for candidates listing in the 2023 general elections shows readiness of the political parties to honor Liberia's international commitments, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Liberia is at a crossroad, and by the signing of this memorandum of understanding by political parties in the NEC, we reaffirm our commitment to changing the current narrative of inequality in Liberia's politics.
Representing the different political parties at the event, Modiba Molu, chairman of the ruling Coalition for Democratic Change, assures of the full implementation of the MOU during the elections.
We are committed. We will demonstrate our commitment as political parties at the national level, at the electoral level, at the structural levels of our different political organizations, be it county-wise, be it district, be it zonal, be it national executive committees of our political processes. And so we'd like you to remain assured that this is a new democratic sojourn that political parties will capitalize on to entrench that policy of increased women participation.
Thursday's ceremony was held under the theme Increasing Women's Political Participation in Elections through the full implementation of Section 4, 5B and C of the new elections law. For Newslink on the West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Pogba in Monrovia.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
If you are just tuning in, this is Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, and all around the world we are streaming on WADR.org. Nigeria and the United Kingdom have reached an agreement to further deepen diplomatic ties on migration, visa issues, justice, and asset recovery. WADR's Usman Umar says a memorandum of understanding to this effect was signed at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Abuja, the nation's capital. His report.
The UK 2023 Migration Dialogue focused on migration, justice and home affairs, where stakeholders deliberated on visa issues, combating organized crime, trafficking, asset recovery and irregular migration. Nigeria's Foreign Minister Geoffrey Onyema, represented by Ambassador-designate Bolaji Akinremi, believes a memorandum of understanding will play a pivotal role towards resolving some of the issues that came up.
We're going to include in this MOU and in our relations vocational and skill acquisition. We're going to be very serious on the issue of a British hospital in Nigeria. We are working with the private sector. We are going to ensure that we work with the British to get Nigeria included in the FATF.
On her part, the acting UK High Commissioner to Nigeria, Jill Arthurson, says of utmost concern to her country is the issue of documentation.
I think one of the things is how we can work together to better understand documentation, because clearly it's in both our interests. Because like you, we recognise the skill and the expertise that many Nigerian people bring to the UK, but we want them to do so legally and properly.
Other stakeholders who spoke, including Controller General of Nigeria Immigration Service, Isa Idris Jerry, illustrated modalities on education, high visa issues and high visa rejection, as well as new visa fees and others.
Globally, if you want to attract investors, is to liberalize your visa policy so that you discourage irregular migration.
It is expected that the new Memorandum of Understanding signed by both countries will resolve visa issues, labor relations and data sharing. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
The Ghana Grid Company, Gridco, has apologized for the recent power outages experienced across the country. According to the power generation company, the issue is due to challenges it encountered with gas supply from Nigeria. For weeks, power consumers have struggled with long hours without electricity and power surges which have destroyed home electrical appliances. Our Accra correspondent, Atiawene Bella Lawson, reports.
My area, there's been a lot of, I don't know whether to call it load shedding or power outage or whatever.
Some frustrated power consumers talking about their experiences with the recent power outages in parts of the country. Many of them are demanding a load-shedding timetable to enable them to prepare.
They won't tell you the truth. That's the fact. They know that maybe we are having issues with our lights here in Ghana, but they will never tell you the truth, and they will tell you, oh, it's a fault, or maybe they will tell you it's a maintenance. They are doing some maintenance, so that is it.
For past 2-3 days at Kaswa Bujumbram, yes, lights is not stable. They will say maybe the transformer is faulty, so they are working on it, so let's give it some time, they'll just get back to us.
But the Ghana Grid Company, Gridco, says the issue is being worked on currently and thus Ghanaians should be patient. Corporate Communications Manager of Gridco, Jifa Bampo, has also apologized to the affected customers. The Managing Director of the Electricity Company of Ghana, Samuel Dubik Mahama, has attributed the recent power outages to inadequate gas supply to fuel power plants. According to him, the energy supplier, Nigeria Gas, is currently having some challenges thus affecting the generation of electricity in the country.
So with ECG, we only sell what we get. If what we are looking for in terms of gigawatt hours doesn't get to our doorstep, we cannot give to our customers. And what we get is what we pay for.
He further noted that although the challenges of Nigeria Gas are yet to be resolved, alternative supplies have been procured to operationalize the power plants. Reporting for Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Atiewin Imbila Lawson in Accra.
A new report by Oxfam says Ghanaian cocoa farmers' patry incomes fell on average by 16% since the start of the pandemic, while the confectionery profits of the 4 biggest public chocolate corporations on average jumped by the same rate. In a report released on Thursday, it noted that chocolate corporations' sustainability programs are failing to deliver on promises to raise farmers' incomes. Oxfam is urging chocolate giants to significantly raise farm gate prices paid to cocoa farmers. Do stay with us as Oxfam Ghana Country Director Tidani Hamza join us in subsequent bulletin to discuss the unending trend despite the living wage initiation for cocoa farmers. Away from that, the West African Development Bank, BOAD, has allocated a fund of 10 billion CFA francs to Togo for the second phase of its project to strengthen food and nutritional security. This envelope aims to strengthen the adaptive capacities of the populations, in particular through better control of climatic risks. It also planned to consolidate sustainable, resilient, and agricultural production, salvo-pastoral, as well as income from agro-pastoral value chains. Implemented in 10 countries on the continent, the P2RS aims to break the cycle of recurrent famine in the sub-region and the Sahel. The World Health Organization, WHO, says mpox no longer represents public health emergency of concern. The announcement came Thursday at the agency's virtual briefing after a meeting of the mpox committee set up to monitor the evolution of the disease. Since July last year, the viral disease has killed 140 people and affected 87,000 others from 111 countries. The WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says, nonetheless, the virus continues to affect communities in all regions, including in Africa, where transmission is still not well understood. He thus urges for the strengthening of health systems.
In July last year, I declared a public health emergency of international concern over the multi-country outbreak of mpox, and the virus spread rapidly across the world. In total, more than 87,000 cases and 140 deaths have been reported to WHO from 111 countries. Almost 90% fewer cases were reported in the past 3 months compared with the previous 3 months. While stigma has been a driving concern in managing this epidemic and continues to hamper access to care for mpox, the feared backlash against the most affected communities has largely not materialized. Yesterday, the Emergency Committee for mpox met and recommended to me that the multi-country outbreak of mpox no longer represents a public health emergency of international concern. I have accepted that advice, and I am pleased to declare that the mpox is no longer a global health emergency. However, as with COVID-19, it remains important for countries to maintain their testing capacities and to continue their efforts, assess their risk, quantify their needs to respond, and act promptly when needed.
Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus is the WHO chief. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM Dakar. Here is a reminder of our top stories. The Open Society Foundation, OSF, calls for regional stability at the ongoing 75th session of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Liberia's electoral umpire and political parties sign MOU to promote a 30% female quota listed in the October 10th elections. The World Health Organization, WHO, says mpox no longer represents public health emergency of concern. And the World Bank says Africa has all the resources it needs not only to get rich but stay prosperous. Still ahead, we have our guest interview and some sports updates. Kindly stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio.
It's 17 minutes past 12 in our studios, and here is West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. This is Newslink, where we bring you updates on all news around the sub-region. Elsewhere in Chad, nearly 2.3 million people, including some 30,000 who fled the conflict in Sudan, are in urgent need of food. To alleviate their suffering, the UN World Food Programme says it requires $162.4 million. Let's join Marty for the rest of the details.
The World Food Programme Thursday announced that the required funding will support the government of Chad in managing the unprecedented humanitarian crisis. 2.3 million Chadians, including over 30,000 people, women and children who recently fled the conflict in Sudan, need urgent food aid. The UN agency said it was responding to growing food needs in the Sahelian nation, but financing shortfalls meant food assistance for refugees and internally displaced people will come to a complete halt this month if no additional funds arrive. Pierre Onoha, WFP's country director in Chad, in a statement said the organization needed urgent funding to provide rapid food assistance to all vulnerable people in the country. The funding appeal, Honorat says, is a race against time as access to many areas of Chad will get cut off when the rainy season hits in June. WFP office in Chad is already pre-positioning food to respond to the Sudan refugee crisis, as over 700,000 Sudanese are reported displaced since the heavy fighting between the federal army and a rival group, RSF, that began mid-April. Alongside security threats perpetrated by terrorist groups including Boko Haram, Chad remains one of the countries on the continent hard hit by global warming.
Matisi with that report. And to energy, the World Bank says Africa has all the resources it needs to not only get rich but stay prosperous. This is the main information contained in a recently published World Bank report. The institution recommends caution in the use of these resources. Oge Obiarika has more.
The World Bank says the continent can reach new heights of prosperity if its wealth, such as minerals, oil and gas, or rare metals, is properly utilized. In a report titled Africa's Resource Future, the Bretton Woods Institution says African states should take advantage of the growing demand for metals, hydrocarbons, and precious minerals to finance social programs such as health and education. They were also urged to diversify their economies and expand access to energy. On average, African countries, the report says, receive only 40% of the revenue they could potentially earn from natural resources, while struggling with slow growth and high public debt. Adopting a set of progressive laws and policies could double revenues from natural assets by implementing reforms, promoting good governance, and improving their tax administration. James Cust, a senior economist in the World Bank's Office of the Chief Economist for Africa and co-author of the report, recommended the prudent use of minerals, hydrocarbons, and rare metals to support poverty reduction and expand access to essential services on the continent.
Oge Obiarika for that report.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Oxfam, in a report released on Thursday, said Chocolate Corporation's sustainability programs are failing to deliver on promises to raise farmers' incomes. According to the report, the world's four largest public chocolate corporations, Hershey, Lindt, Mondelez, and Nestle, have together made nearly $15 billion in profit from their confectionery divisions alone since the onset of the pandemic. The jump represents an average of 16% since 2020. On the flip side, a survey by Oxfam revealed that more than 400 cocoa farmers supplying chocolate corporations across Ghana found that their net incomes have fallen on average by 16% since 2020, with women's falling by nearly 22%. At least 9 out of 10 farmers said they are worse off since the pandemic. Our guest, Oxfam's Ghana Country Director Tijani Hamza, tells WADR why the trend is unending despite the living wage initiation for cocoa farmers.
The trend is actually a reflection of the global and just economic system that we have, in the sense that the economic system we have in the world does not work for the poor. And if you zero into, for example, farmers in the tree crop sector, which is almost made up of poor men and women, they are not able to get living income. And it is even so, and also ironic in the sense that over the last couple of years, as you may have heard, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana haven't recognized that with the challenges of income from farmers from their cocoa, decided to put on what you call living income differentials to cushion farmers. And irrespective of that, we still have these problems.
So what other findings were discovered by Oxfam in this?
Okay, a lot of interesting farming. So just to say that because of the historical challenge of farmers' low income, companies started what we call sustainability strategies as means of enhancing the income levels of farmers. And this is a global strategy, but used by different companies in every country. So actually what this research sought to do was for us to learn from some of these strategies to see the extent to which we think that incomes on farmers have, increased. Unfortunately, the findings are quite to the contrary. So for example, even though all the companies follow what I call a blueprint approach to raising farmer incomes with a focus on production, this did not necessarily lead to increased income. So they supported in processes with maybe inputs, some tools and training program, but it never really resulted in increased income, even though in some instances it resulted into increased productivity. There was also related to that whole issue is lack of clear commitment to achieve living income. So the interventions that they did focus a lot on productivity. As you know, if you do a lot to increase productivity, but you don't manage production cost, then at the end, I can increase productivity, but the resources I invest, business is also high. That makes my profit minimal.
What would you say is responsible for this disparity? Is it the fault of the Ghanaian government? Is it the fault of Cocoa Board? Or is it the fault of the farmers themselves?
It's a multifaceted issue. So, I started the argument by telling that the whole economic system is not just. That those who are at one end of the receiving end of a finished product are making excess of billions of dollars. But those who live their livelihood on cocoa actually are even getting worse off. I think it is good that, for example, governments in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire started the whole initiative around the level income differential. But we have realized that the level income differential of $400 per ton will not solve the problem. So we need to relook at the whole issue around living income differential to bridge the gap between what the farmers are offered, but also what is real income. The other one, as I mentioned, has to do with the entire process around the high cost of inputs. I recognize that the Ghana government through Cocoa Board supports in different ways in the entire value chain, but they can only do enough. They cannot provide input for the over 800,000 cocoa farmers we have in Ghana. So the Ghana government, I think, will have to do something related to managing the sort of inputs that we have in the country.
Tijani Hamza is Osfarm's Ghana Country Director. Let's join Sankule Janko for some sports updates.
Hello out there, warm welcome and thank you for joining us. Nigeria have been knocked out of the Under-17 Africa Cup of Nations after a 2-1 defeat by Burkina Faso at the Nelson Mandela Stadium in Algiers on Thursday. The victory earned Burkina Faso a place in the semi-final of the AFCON and a ticket in the FIFA World Cup Argentina 2023. Burkina Faso took the lead in the 44th minute when Abubakar Kamara scored from close range after a mistake from the Nigerian defender Chukwu Oboji. Kamara scored his second of the night to add Burkina's tally just 10 minutes after the restart when Suleiman Aliou was brought down inside the box by Ogboji. The Golden Eagles pulled one back in the 67th minute when Abdullahi tapped home from close range after a cross from Emmanuel Mikel. However, their hopes of a 13th qualification to the FIFA Under-17 World Cup and another AFCON title were crushed as Burkina's Junior Stallions held on to win. In the other semi-final match, Mali cruised to the semis and booked a ticket to the FIFA Under-17 World Cup following a comfortable 3-0 win against Congo on Thursday. Goals from Angetia, Mamadou Doumbouya and Mahamoud Bari were enough to earn the Malian Eagles a place in the last four of the tournament. Meanwhile, a new winner is set to be crowned after the elimination of reigning champions Cameroon at the group stage. Unbeaten Senegal, who thrashed South Africa 5-0 in the quarterfinal, will take on 2011 winners Burkina Faso in the semi-final, and Mali will take on Morocco in the other semi-final match. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
Thank you, Sankule, for that sports update. We have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to our listeners in the Gambia via Hot 104.3 FM, and in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County, and in Ghana on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi. Christian Mukidi has been on the console. Many thanks to Mustafa Sek for our Facebook live coverage. Do interact with us via social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. My name is James Adjapong. Enjoy your afternoon.
News, talk,
music,
Get it all 24 hours on West Africa Democracy Radio. 94.9 FM Dakar.